Marcus Wellington III stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the Seattle skyline blur through the October rain. At 32, he had everything society said a man should want: a tech empire worth $800 million, a mansion overlooking Puget Sound, and invitations to every exclusive event on the West Coast. Yet as he stared at his reflection in the glass, all he saw was a stranger wearing an expensive suit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His phone buzzed with another text from his assistant about tonight's charity auction. Another evening of forced conversations with people who saw dollar signs when they looked at him. Another night of women approaching with practiced smiles and calculated interest. Another reminder that his wealth had become both his greatest asset and his most insurmountable barrier to genuine connection. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus had built his fortune creating software that connected people across the globe. Yet he himself felt more isolated than ever. His dating app, HeartLink, had facilitated over 2 million successful relationships. Users sent him grateful messages daily about finding their soulmates through his platform. But Marcus himself had never experienced the love he helped others find. His last relationship had ended 6 months ago, when he discovered his girlfriend of 8 months selling private details about his life to tabloid magazines. Before that, there was the woman who tried to manipulate him into funding her friend's failing business. And before that, the socialite who was more interested in his connections than his conversation. Each betrayal had built another wall around his heart, until he began to wonder if genuine love was just another product he could create but never personally possess. 3 weeks ago, his younger sister Emma had confronted him during their monthly dinner. "Marcus, you're disappearing," she had said, her eyes filled with concern. "You've become this hollow version of yourself. When was the last time you laughed? Really laughed? When was the last time you talked about something other than quarterly reports and market projections?" Her words had haunted him. Emma was right. Somewhere along the path to success, he had lost himself. The passionate 22-year-old who had started HeartLink in his garage, driven by a genuine desire to help people find connection, had been replaced by a cynical businessman who viewed every interaction through the lens of potential exploitation. That night, Marcus had made a decision that surprised even him. He would give love one last chance. Not the manufactured encounters at society events, or the calculated setups by well-meaning friends, but real, organic connection. If it didn't happen within the next month, he would accept that some people were simply meant to be alone. He would stop hoping, stop trying, and focus entirely on his work. But where does a millionaire go to find authentic love? Every usual venue came with complications. Charity events attracted people who knew his net worth before they knew his name. Dating apps, even his own, felt compromised when potential matches could easily discover his identity. High-end restaurants and exclusive clubs were filled with the same social circle that had proven so disappointing. Marcus needed to step outside his world entirely. The idea came to him during a conversation with his housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had worked for his family for 15 years. She was telling him about her granddaughter's love of reading and how the local library had become her sanctuary after her parents' divorce. "She says the librarian there understands her," Mrs. Rodriguez had explained, "makes her feel like books are magic, like stories can heal anything. It's the only place where being quiet and thoughtful is seen as a gift, not a weakness." That's when it hit him. Libraries were one of the few places left where people went for genuine reasons. To learn, to escape, to find solace. Not to network or impress or manipulate. Just to exist with stories and knowledge and possibility. Marcus had never spent much time in libraries. His education had been private schools with extensive personal libraries. Then Stanford, where he'd focused more on computer labs than reading rooms. But something about Mrs. Rodriguez's description appealed to him. A place where being thoughtful was valued, where quiet observation was welcomed, where people came seeking something deeper than surface connections. So here he was, standing in his office on a Thursday afternoon, preparing to do something completely out of character. He had researched the Seattle Public Library system and chosen the Queen Anne branch, close enough to be convenient, but in a neighborhood where his face wouldn't be immediately recognized. He had even gone shopping for what he hoped were appropriately casual clothes. Dark jeans, a simple gray sweater, and boots that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but at least didn't scream luxury brand. The plan was simple. If he could call stepping into unknown territory simple, he would spend time at the library, maybe check out some books, observe how normal people interacted in that environment. If he met someone interesting, great. If not, he would consider it research into how the other half lived. Either way, it would be a change from his usual routine. Marcus grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator, leaving behind his usual entourage of security and assistants. For the first time in years, he would venture into the world alone, without the protective bubble of wealth and status that both shielded and isolated him. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: nervousness. Not the calculated anxiety of a business deal or public presentation, but the raw, uncertain nervousness of someone about to step into uncharted territory. It was uncomfortable and thrilling at the same time. He thought about Emma's words again. When was the last time he had felt truly vulnerable? When had he last allowed himself to want something he couldn't simply purchase? This one last chance at love would require him to be more than his bank account, more than his accomplishments, more than the carefully constructed image he presented to the world. The Queen Anne Library was a modest building compared to the gleaming towers of his usual haunts. As Marcus pulled into the parking lot, he noticed the diverse mix of people coming and going: families with young children, elderly individuals with walking aids, teenagers with backpacks, professionals grabbing something during lunch breaks, all of them united by the simple desire to read, to learn, to find something within those walls. Taking a deep breath, Marcus checked his reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. No designer labels visible, no obvious signs of wealth, except perhaps the subtle quality of his clothes. To anyone observing, he hoped he would appear to be just another Seattle resident, seeking refuge from the rain and routine. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the library entrance, each step taking him further from his familiar world and closer to whatever awaited him inside. This was it. His one last chance at finding something real, something that couldn't be bought, manipulated, or engineered, something that might finally fill the emptiness that all his success had failed to touch. The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Marcus Wellington III, tech mogul and reluctant romantic, stepped into a world he had never known, but hoped might hold the key to the happiness that had eluded him for so long. The Queen Anne Library buzzed with quiet activity as Marcus stepped inside. The scent of books and coffee from a small cafe corner filled the air, creating an atmosphere he found unexpectedly comforting. Children's laughter echoed from a distant section, while keyboards clicked softly from the computer area. For someone accustomed to the sterile efficiency of corporate environments, this felt refreshingly alive. Marcus wandered through the stacks, genuinely curious about how this world operated. He watched as people browsed shelves with purpose, running their fingers along spines until they found exactly what they sought. Others sat in reading nooks, completely absorbed in their books, oblivious to everything around them. There was something beautiful about the focused contentment on their faces. He found himself in the business section, surrounded by entrepreneurship guides and leadership manuals. The irony struck him. Here he was, surrounded by books teaching people how to achieve what he already had, yet he was the one seeking guidance. He pulled out a volume on work-life balance, wondering if the author had any solutions for when success became its own prison. Finding everything you need? The voice startled him. Marcus turned to see a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days and jeans with small tears at the knees. She carried a stack of books and wore a name tag that read, Sophie Chen, reference librarian. Her brown eyes held genuine curiosity rather than recognition, and Marcus felt an immediate sense of relief. Actually, I'm not sure what I'm looking for, Marcus admitted, surprised by his own honesty. Sophie smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Those are my favorite kinds of questions. Mind if I ask, what brought you to the business section? Are you starting a company? Looking to grow an existing one? Or maybe trying to figure out what comes after success? Her perceptiveness caught him off guard. The last one, I think. Ah, a fellow traveler in the what now territory. Sophie set her stack of books on a nearby cart. I see a lot of people here struggling with that question. Success is supposed to feel different than it does, isn't it? Quote, Marcus stared at her, wondering how this librarian in worn clothes had just articulated something he'd been unable to express to therapists and business coaches. How did you know? Body language, mostly. Plus, you've been holding that same book for 10 minutes without opening it. People who are truly looking for business advice tend to be more aggressive in their browsing. You look like someone who has answers but is searching for different questions. There was something disarming about her directness. In Marcus's world, conversations were layered with subtext and hidden agendas. Sophie seemed incapable of anything but straightforward honesty. I'm Sophie, by the way, and you are? Marcus. He almost added his last name automatically, then caught himself. Just Marcus. Well, just Marcus, what kind of work do you do? That might help me point you towards something useful. Marcus hesitated. This was the moment where his cover story would matter. I work in tech. Software development. It wasn't technically a lie, though it was the understatement of the century. Seattle's full of tech people. Let me guess. You built something successful, maybe even revolutionary, but now you're wondering if there's more to life than code and quarterly projections? Her accuracy was unsettling. Something like that. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophie pulled a different book from the shelf. Try this one. It's about finding purpose beyond profit. The author was a Fortune 500 CEO who walked away from everything to become a teacher. Might resonate with someone asking the right questions. As she handed him the book, their fingers brushed briefly. Marcus felt an unexpected jolt, not of recognition or calculation, but of simple human connection. When was the last time someone had touched him without wanting something in return? Thanks, he said. Then found himself asking, do you enjoy working here? Sophie's eyes lit up. I love it. Every day is different. 1 minute I'm helping a teenager research colleges. The next I'm teaching an elderly man how to video chat with his grandchildren in Korea. This morning I helped a woman find poetry that could help her process grief. There's something profound about being part of people's learning journeys. And the pay doesn't bother you? Marcus asked, then immediately regretted the question. It revealed too much about his own perspective. But Sophie just laughed. You sound like my mother. Yes, I could make more money elsewhere, but I have enough to cover my needs. I genuinely love what I do, and I go home every day feeling like I've made a difference in someone's life. How many people can say that? Marcus thought about his own daily routine, board meetings where millions of dollars were discussed like abstract concepts, strategic planning sessions focused on market domination, investor calls where human impact was measured solely in user acquisition numbers. When was the last time he'd felt like he'd made a real difference in someone's day? You're right, he said softly. Not many people can say that. A crash interrupted their conversation. Near the children's section, a young boy had knocked over a display of picture books while chasing his sister. The children's faces crumpled with embarrassment as books scattered across the floor. Their mother looked mortified, frantically apologizing to another librarian. Sophie immediately moved toward the chaos. Hey there, adventurers, she called out cheerfully. Looks like these books decided to have a little dance party. Want to help me gather them up? Quote. She turned the accident into a game, asking the children to sort the books by color while she restacked them. Within minutes, the display was rebuilt, the children were giggling, and their mother was smiling gratefully. Marcus watched this transformation with fascination. In his world, problems were solved with money or corporate efficiency. Sophie had solved this with creativity and kindness, turning a moment of shame into one of joy. That was impressive, he said when she returned. Kids respond to how you frame situations. If you treat their mistakes as disasters, they internalize shame. If you treat mistakes as adventures or learning opportunities, they build resilience. She paused, studying his face. The same principle works with adults, actually. Is that your philosophy? Reframe disasters as adventures? Among other things. I also believe that every person who walks through these doors has a story worth knowing. Everyone's fighting battles you can't see, carrying dreams they might not even acknowledge. My job isn't just to find them books, it's to remind them that they matter. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. This woman, who probably made less in a year than he spent on wine, had just articulated a worldview that made his corporate mission statements sound hollow and meaningless. "That's beautiful," he said, and meant it. Sophie blushed slightly. "Sorry, I get a little philosophical about libraries, occupational hazard." "Don't apologize. It's refreshing to hear someone talk about their work with genuine passion. What about you? Do you love what you do?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him about love in relation to his work. People asked about profits, about growth, about market strategy. But love? "I used to," he said finally. "I think I built something meaningful once, but somewhere along the way it became more about the building than the meaning." Sophie nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That happens. Success can be its own trap. But the good news is, it's never too late to remember why you started." A timer chimed softly from Sophie's pocket. "Story time in 5 minutes," she explained. "I need to set up." "But Marcus, if you're looking for books about rediscovering purpose, I can recommend several. Or, if you just want to see what genuine joy looks like, you're welcome to sit in on story time. Adults are always welcome." Quote. Before he could respond, she was heading toward the children's section, calling out to parents and kids who were already gathering in a circle of small chairs. Marcus found himself following, drawn by curiosity and something deeper he couldn't name. As Sophie settled into her chair and opened a picture book about a lost whale finding his way home, Marcus took a seat in the back. He watched her transform again, becoming animated and expressive as she brought the story to life. The children were mesmerized, but so was Marcus. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about market shares or profit margins. He was simply present, watching a woman who had found her calling and embraced it completely. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought began to form. Maybe his one last chance at love wasn't about finding someone who could fit into his world, but about discovering if he could find his way into someone else's. Marcus found himself returning to the Queen Anne Library every Tuesday and Thursday for the next 3 weeks. He told himself it was research, understanding how regular people lived and worked. But if he was honest, it was Sophie who drew him back. Each visit revealed new layers to the woman who had somehow seen through his corporate armor in a single conversation. On his 4th visit, Sophie approached him in the biography section, where he'd been pretending to browse memoirs of tech entrepreneurs. "You know," she said with an amused smile, "for someone in software development, you spend a lot of time reading about people who've left the tech world." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Just trying to understand different perspectives. "Uh-huh." Sophie pulled a book from the shelf. "This one might interest you then. It's about a programmer who quit Microsoft to become a wilderness guide. Says the best code he ever wrote was helping people disconnect from technology to reconnect with themselves." She had an uncanny ability to select exactly the right book for his mood. Marcus was beginning to suspect she saw more than she let on. "Sophie, can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "How do you do it? Read people so accurately? It's like you have some kind of superpower." Sophie laughed, settling into a nearby reading chair. "My secret weapon is actually listening. Most people are so busy planning what they're going to say next that they miss all the important information people give away unconsciously. You, for instance. Quote, "What do I give away? You dress like you're trying to blend in, but your clothes are too perfect. No worn edges, no fading, no personality. You check an expensive watch when you think no one's looking. You're always surprised when I remember your name, like you're used to being forgotten in crowds. And you ask questions about money and career satisfaction like someone who has both but wishes he didn't." Marcus stared at her, simultaneously impressed and unnerved. "You've been profiling me." "It's not profiling, it's caring. When someone interests me, I pay attention." She paused, studying his face. "You interest me, Marcus. There's a sadness in your eyes that doesn't match the success story you're trying to project." The directness of her observation caught him off guard. In his world, people rarely acknowledged emotional reality so bluntly. "Maybe I'm just naturally melancholy. Or maybe you're living someone else's definition of success." Before Marcus could respond, a teenage girl approached their corner, tears streaming down her face. Sophie immediately shifted into librarian mode. "Hey, Jessica, rough day?" The girl nodded, unable to speak. Sophie guided her to a quieter section, and Marcus watched as she somehow coaxed out the story. A college rejection letter, disappointed parents, feelings of failure at 17. Marcus expected Sophie to offer platitudes, but instead she listened with complete focus, asking thoughtful questions and validating the girl's feelings. "You know what?" Sophie said finally. "Let's find some books about people who succeeded after initial failures. Sometimes the best stories start with a closed door." 20 minutes later, Jessica left with an armload of biographies and a genuine smile. Marcus was amazed by the transformation. "Does that happen often?" he asked. "More than you'd think. Teenagers especially, they're carrying so much pressure to have their entire lives figured out. I try to remind them that the most interesting people I know took detours." "Like you?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think I took detours?" "Just a hunch. You're too wise about life's complexities to have followed a straight path." "Fair observation." Sophie gathered her books. "I actually started college pre-med. My parents are both doctors, and it seemed like the logical choice. Took me 3 semesters to realize I was more interested in understanding people's stories than their symptoms." Quote, "That must have been a difficult conversation with your parents." "Catastrophic. They couldn't understand why I'd choose a career that would keep me poor and insignificant." Their words, not mine. We didn't speak for almost a year. Marcus thought about his own family dynamics, the pressure to maintain appearances and exceed expectations. Do they understand now? They're trying to. My mom still introduces me as Sophie. She's very smart but chose to work in a library. Like it's a character flaw she hopes I'll outgrow. Sophie smiled wryly. But I've learned that other people's disappointment in your choices says more about their fears than your worth. The wisdom in her words hit Marcus like a physical force. How many of his own choices had been driven by fear of disappointing others rather than pursuit of authentic happiness? "What about you?" Sophie asked. "Are your parents proud of your tech success?" Marcus hesitated. His father had been dead for 5 years, and his relationship with his mother was complicated by her social ambitions and his wealth. "My father would have been proud. My mother, she's proud of what I've achieved, but I'm not sure she knows who I actually am anymore." "That's heartbreaking." "Is it?" "I have everything she wanted for me." "But do you have what you want for yourself?" The question hung between them, unanswered and unanswerable in the moment. Marcus realized that for the first time in years, someone was asking him about his inner life, rather than his external achievements. Their conversation was interrupted by Mr. Patterson, an elderly man who visited the library daily. He approached with a computer printout, looking frustrated. "Sophie, dear, I'm trying to order groceries online for delivery, but this website keeps asking for information I don't understand. My grandson set up the account, but now I'm completely lost." "Of course, Mr. Patterson. Let's go to the computer lab and walk through it together." Marcus watched as Sophie patiently guided the elderly man through each step of online grocery shopping, explaining not just what to click, but why each field mattered. She turned a technological frustration into a learning opportunity, building his confidence rather than just solving his immediate problem. When they returned, Mr. Patterson was beaming. "She's a treasure, this one," he told Marcus. "Treats everyone like family. My own kids are too busy to help me with this computer nonsense, but Sophie always has time." Quote. After he left, Marcus found himself studying Sophie with new appreciation. "You do that a lot, don't you? Go above and beyond?" "It's not above and beyond. It's just being human. Mr. Patterson isn't just learning to order groceries online. He's maintaining his independence, staying in his own home longer, feeling capable in a world that increasingly makes him feel obsolete. The grocery delivery is just the surface." Marcus thought about his own company's user experience design. They focused on efficiency and engagement, but did they ever consider the deeper human needs their technology served? You see layers in everything, don't you? In your software development? Marcus paused, realizing he hadn't thought about the human impact of his work in years. "I used to. When I started, I was passionate about connecting people, helping them find meaningful relationships. But it became more about metrics and monetization." "What changed?" "Success, I guess. When something works, there's pressure to scale it, optimize it, extract maximum value from it. Somewhere in that process, I stopped seeing users as people and started seeing them as data points." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "That sounds lonely." "It is. But recognizing it is the first step toward changing it." As closing time approached, Marcus found himself reluctant to leave. These conversations with Sophie were the highlight of his week, the only times he felt like himself, rather than a carefully constructed public persona. "Sophie, would you like to get coffee sometime, outside of library hours?" She studied his face carefully. "Are you asking me on a date, Marcus?" "I'm asking if I can spend more time talking with someone who sees the world in ways that challenge me to think differently." That's either the most honest thing you've said since we met or the most elaborate way of avoiding the word date I've ever heard. Marcus laughed, surprising himself. "Maybe both." "Okay then, coffee it is, but I picked the place." "Deal." As Marcus walked to his car that evening, he realized something had shifted. For the first time since deciding to give love one last chance, he wasn't thinking about success or failure, timelines or outcomes. He was simply looking forward to continuing a conversation with someone who made him want to be more than his accomplishments suggested he was. 6 months after their first coffee date, Marcus stood in his empty penthouse, boxing up the remnants of his old life. The walls that once displayed awards and magazine covers featuring his success now held children's drawings from the library's art program, colorful crayon masterpieces that Sophie had brought home, insisting they deserved gallery treatment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It began 3 months into their relationship, when Sophie accidentally discovered his true identity during a Google search for Marcus Software Seattle while helping him research volunteer opportunities. The search results had filled her screen with headlines: Tech mogul Marcus Wellington III, HeartLink founder worth $800 million, Seattle's most eligible bachelor. Marcus had found her that evening sitting in her small apartment, staring at her laptop with a mixture of shock and hurt. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she had asked quietly. The conversation that followed was the most honest of Marcus's life. He explained his fear of being valued only for his wealth, his desperate desire to be loved for who he was rather than what he owned. Sophie had listened without judgment, but her trust had been shaken. "I understand why you hid it," she finally said. "But a relationship built on omission isn't really built at all." They had started over that night, with Marcus sharing everything. His loneliness despite success, his family's expectations, his growing realization that the life he had built was impressive but empty. Sophie had shared her own fears about their different worlds, her concern that she could never be enough for someone of his stature. But instead of driving them apart, honesty had brought them closer. Sophie began to understand the prison that wealth could create, while Marcus discovered that Sophie's enough was more than he had ever dreamed of finding. The real turning point came when Marcus made a decision that shocked the tech world. During a board meeting where executives discussed strategies to increase user engagement and maximize data collection, Marcus had looked around the conference table and seen what Sophie would see: people treating human connection as a commodity to be optimized and monetized. "What if we're doing this wrong?" he had asked suddenly, interrupting a presentation about advertising revenue. The room fell silent. Marcus continued, "What if instead of finding more ways to keep users on the platform longer, we focused on helping them build better offline relationships? What if success meant people spending less time on our app because they found genuine connection?" His board members had exchanged concerned glances. The CFO cleared his throat. "Marcus, that's not exactly a profitable business model. Maybe profit shouldn't be the only model." That comment led to emergency meetings, investor calls, and ultimately, Marcus's decision to step back from day-to-day operations. He retained ownership, but transferred leadership to executives who shared his renewed vision of technology serving humanity rather than exploiting it. The media called it a breakdown. Marcus called it a breakthrough. He used his newfound freedom to pursue something he hadn't done since college, work that mattered more than money. He partnered with the Seattle Public Library System to create digital literacy programs for underserved communities. He funded mobile libraries that brought books and internet access to homeless encampments. He developed educational software that libraries could use for free, no data collection or advertising required. For the first time in years, Marcus woke up excited about his work, but more importantly, he woke up next to someone who loved him for the person he was becoming, not the empire he had built. Sophie had been his guide through this transformation, but not in the way he had expected. She didn't try to change him or fix him. Instead, she simply continued being herself. Passionate, principled, endlessly curious about the world and the people in it. Her example showed him what authentic living looked like. Today marked the culmination of their journey together. Marcus had planned this moment for weeks, with Sophie unknowingly helping him orchestrate every detail. At the library, Sophie was finishing her final story time before taking a leave of absence. She had been accepted into a graduate program for children's literature, with Marcus secretly funding scholarships for other librarians to pursue advanced degrees. But Sophie didn't know about the scholarships, just as she didn't know about many of Marcus's behind-the-scenes efforts to support the causes she cared about. And so the little elephant learned that being different wasn't something to hide, but something to celebrate, Sophie concluded, closing the picture book as children applauded. As the families gathered their things to leave, Marcus appeared in the doorway of the children's section, carrying a leather-bound manuscript. "Marcus!" Sophie's face lit up. "I didn't expect you until later." "I brought you something," he said, approaching with nervous energy that made Sophie curious. She opened the manuscript to find a children's story written in Marcus's handwriting, with professional illustrations tucked between pages. The title page read, "The Library Angel and the Lost Businessman," by Marcus Wellington III, dedicated to Sophie, who taught me that the best stories are the ones we write together. Sophie's hands trembled as she read the opening lines. Once upon a time, there was a very successful but very lonely businessman who had forgotten how to see magic in the world. One day, he wandered into a library and met an angel disguised as a librarian, who reminded him that the most important things in life can't be bought, only discovered. The story continued, chronicling their entire relationship through the lens of a children's fairy tale. The businessman learned that real success meant helping others find their own stories. The librarian angel showed him that love wasn't about grand gestures, but about small, daily choices to care for each other and their community. As Sophie reached the final page, she found an illustration of the businessman and the librarian angel surrounded by books and children, with text that read, "And they decided to write the rest of their story together, one page at a time." Tucked behind the last illustration was a handwritten note. "Sophie, you showed me that happy endings aren't something that happen to us. They're something we create through love, purpose, and the courage to be authentically ourselves. Will you help me write the rest of our story?" When Sophie looked up from the manuscript, Marcus was kneeling beside her chair, holding a ring that wasn't the largest or most expensive he could afford, but one he had chosen because it reminded him of her, simple, elegant, and genuinely beautiful. "Sophie Chen," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "you wrote my happy ending before I even knew I needed one. You taught me that the best love stories aren't about changing ourselves for someone else, but about becoming the person we were meant to be alongside someone who sees our potential. Will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, Sophie whispered, "Yes." As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophie realized that fairy tales weren't about perfect people finding perfect love. They were about real people choosing to write better stories together, one chapter at a time. Around them, the library hummed with its usual activity. People discovering new worlds in books, children laughing in reading corners, individuals finding solace in stories. It was the perfect setting for two people who had learned that the greatest love story isn't about escaping reality, but about finding someone who makes reality worth living. Marcus Wellington III had given himself one last chance at love, and Sophie Chen had written his happy ending by teaching him to write it himself. Their story would continue in the work they'd do together, the family they'd build, and the countless small moments of choosing each other again and again. In the end, love wasn't something that happened to them. It was something they created, nurtured, and shared with a world that desperately needed reminders that genuine connection was still possible, one story at a time. 1 year later, Marcus and Sophie stood together at the grand opening of the Wellington Community Learning Center, a state-of-the-art facility that combined traditional library services with technology education, creative writing workshops, and entrepreneurship programs for underserved youth. The building buzzed with excitement as families explored interactive learning spaces designed to bridge the digital divide while celebrating the timeless power of books. "Look at this," Sophie whispered, squeezing Marcus's hand as they watched a group of teenagers collaborate on coding projects while surrounded by towering bookshelves. "This is what happens when technology serves humanity instead of the other way around." Marcus watched a young girl teach her grandmother how to use a tablet to access audiobooks, while nearby, a father and son worked together building a robot from a kit provided by Marcus's educational foundation. The scene embodied everything he had learned about true success. It wasn't measured in personal accumulation, but in community elevation. Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus's former housekeeper who now managed community outreach for the center, approached with a clipboard full of volunteer sign-ups. "Mr. Marcus, we have a waiting list of 200 families wanting to join our programs. The response has exceeded every projection." "That's wonderful," Marcus replied, but his attention was drawn to Sophie, who had knelt down to help a shy boy select his first chapter book. The child's face lit up as she explained how the protagonist reminded her of him, quiet but brave, thoughtful but strong. Marcus marveled at how she could see potential in everyone she met. Their wedding 3 months earlier had been unconventional by society standards. Instead of an expensive venue, they had exchanged vows in the original Queen Anne Library where they met, surrounded by books and the people who mattered most. Children from Sophie's story time served as flower girls and ring bearers. Mr. Patterson, now proficient in online technology thanks to Sophie's patient tutoring, had walked her down the aisle since her own father was still struggling to accept her choices. The ceremony had been followed by a reception at the community center, where guests included tech executives alongside homeless individuals who used the mobile library services Marcus had funded. It was a gathering that perfectly represented their shared values: inclusion, authenticity, and the belief that everyone's story mattered. Marcus's mother had initially been horrified by the unconventional celebration, but as the evening progressed, she found herself deep in conversation with Sophie's former foster siblings, listening to stories of resilience that moved her to tears. By the end of the night, she had quietly written a substantial check to support the mobile library program. "Your wife is remarkable," she had told Marcus later. "She doesn't just talk about making a difference. She embodies it. I'm beginning to understand why you chose her over the senator's daughter I kept promoting." Now, as Marcus watched Sophie guide a group of immigrant mothers through their first English-language story time, he reflected on how completely his definition of wealth had transformed. True richness wasn't about what you could acquire, but about what you could give. It wasn't about building walls to protect your success, but about opening doors for others to find their own. His phone buzzed with a message from Emma, his sister, who was volunteering at a similar center they had opened in Portland. "The kids here are already asking when Uncle Marcus and Aunt Sophie are visiting again. Your storytelling skills have improved dramatically since you started learning from a professional." Marcus smiled, remembering his recent attempts at leading storytime sessions. Sophie had taught him that connecting with children required vulnerability and playfulness, qualities that years of corporate leadership had nearly eliminated. Rediscovering them had been both humbling and liberating. As the day wound down and families began heading home with armloads of books and new knowledge, Marcus and Sophie found themselves alone in the center's main reading room. Soft evening light filtered through large windows, casting warm shadows across the comfortable seating areas and colorful murals painted by local artists. "Do you ever miss it?" Sophie asked, settling into the reading nook where they often spent quiet evenings together. "The corporate world, the adrenaline of big deals, the recognition." Marcus joined her, pulling her close as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Success was clearer when it could be measured in dollars and market share. This work is messier, harder to quantify." But when that little girl hugged you today after choosing her first chapter book, when Mr. Patterson proudly showed off his new digital skills, when those teenagers realized they could code their own solutions to community problems, those moments are worth more than any quarterly profit report I ever received. Sophie traced patterns on his chest as they sat in comfortable silence. "You know what I love most about our story?" "What's that?" "It's not finished. Every day we get to write new chapters, discover new plot twists, introduce new characters. Love isn't a destination. It's an ongoing adventure." Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with the vanilla candles she loved. "What do you think the next chapter holds?" Sophie's hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach, where new life had just begun growing. "I think," she said with a secret smile, "our story is about to expand in the most beautiful way possible." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Seattle, Marcus Wellington III and Sophie Chen Wellington sat surrounded by books and dreams, writing happily ever after, one moment of genuine love and shared purpose at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.